little buzzer to beep. Should be one more. There we go. Okay, so the last battle that we put in our notes yesterday was in Okinawa. More Americans are going to die in Okinawa than any other battle in the Pacific, including Pearl Harbor. It was an incredibly devastating battle, and most people assumed that once we get to Japan, it's going to be even worse. Now, to truly understand the battle, HBO several years ago made a film called Pacific, and it followed 3 different Marines through the 4 years of the battle. The last one was Eugene Sledge, and Sledge participated at Okinawa, and it profoundly changed him. And this is kind of a promo for that and a biography of Eugene Sledge at the same time.
Who are you? Probably Eugene Sledge, sir. The responsibility in playing Eugene Sledge is enormous, to make sure that I live up to the man that he really was.
He wrote a book, which the show is partially based on.
We wanted this to really be based on, real people in real survival situations.
The war in the Pacific was savage, brutal. It was hideously difficult for all of them.
I've never been more scared in my entire life.
And he wasn't scared out here, so under a liar or dead.
He had that sense of duty and patriotism, where he really wanted to defend his country and be a part of that.
He felt he owed something to his country. All his friends had been drafted or had enlisted and had left.
Gene's very good friend Sidney Phillips had joined the Marine Corps and was leaving. That was partially why Gene was so anxious to go. Sid was at Guadalcanal and wrote letters home to Gene.
I told Sledge in one of my letters from Guadalcanal that he should join nothing, not even the Girl Scouts, not the Boy Scouts, the Salvation Army. I said, just stay out of everything and anything.
He decided that the war might end before he could get over there, and so he wanted to join the Marines. He had to ask his parents permission, and his father said, well, they won't take you, you have a heart murmur. He said, well, I want to try anyway. His father was a physician, and he said, well, let me check you.
He eventually succeeds in convincing his father, when the heart murmur goes away, to let him enlist. But his father's the one that warns him. His father says, I'm afraid what's going to happen to you on the inside.
The worst thing about treating those combat boys from the Great War wasn't that they had had their flesh torn. It was that they had had their souls torn out.
They shipped out to Peleliu, which was next on the list to be taken out by the Marines. The 1st Marine Division was in the front lines approximately 30 days. He was in combat and under fire the entire time.
For Sledge, Peleliu was his first battle. He realizes 2 seconds into it that war is nothing like he could have imagined.
Gene Sledge did his job and did what he was told to do. You can't ask for any more than that of any man.
Eugene was fine in combat, but combat did not interest him. It horrified him.
There's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. And when I do think about it, I try to force myself to think about the good buddies I had and some of the things that we did that were funny. But then you also remember the dead, and many of them there were. And they were just snuffed out. And there's no way you can forget them.
My buddy Eugene seemed to be haunted by the war.
Gene had nightmares for many years after the war.
Eugene Sledge had a very difficult time adjusting to civilian life after the war. He was beset, as many other veterans, with thoughts about why he had survived when so many others had died.
That's one of the cases of war that not only does a man fight in a war, and if he survives, he's got to live with it the rest of his life.
The Pacific is about the private war that all of those veterans had to fight to save themselves from what they were witnessing and what they were engaged in.
You can't dwell on it. You can't dwell on any of it. My father would say that one of the worst things about World War II was the complete waste of human life, of human potential, brutalization of survivors.
It is extraordinary that Eugene Sledge came home as he did and lived as he did.
What you have to do is to try to focus your mind on other things.
The thing that helped him to conquer the nightmares and the terrible experiences that would flash back into his mind was to start thinking about something in biology. He had found his calling. He also found that he enjoyed teaching.
My father saw himself as a simple scientist with a love of the natural world who had endured something unspeakable and wanted to convey that to later times and other people. And the best way to do that would be through simply recording what he had observed.
Eugene Sledge wrote with the old breed at Peleliu and Okinawa, which is arguably the best memoir of combat anywhere.
They were not allowed to keep diaries on the front lines.
You're supposed to write shit down, you know. There's the Japs valuable intel, they find it.
So he had a little New Testament, and he wrote on the pages of that, he would make little notes to help him remember what had happened at what particular point. And when he came home from the war, one of the first things he did was sit down and write out a complete outline of his experiences.
Eugene Sledge waited years and years and years and years and years before he could put this down on paper. And he didn't publish it until the 1980s. That's a long time to ponder what he had been through.
He wrote it for his family, for us to know what he had been through and to have some sense of his experience in World War II and something we could pass on to our children.
To think that someone you knew and loved and who was so modest and gentle could have gone through something that horrific and had enough presence of mind to be able to write it down in a coherent fashion and not go mad.
Gene felt that writing the book would lay the war to rest for him.
The experience was so incredibly intense that after it was all over with, life was never the same, because the sunrise is always more beautiful to me now than it ever was before I started in the Peleliu on that Amtrak.
He had a great feeling of serenity. He had already been through the worst that life could throw at him, and he knew that he was able to stand up to it.
This slide is not in the packet that was originally given out. World War II is going to produce more Congressional Medal of Honor winners than any other war in American history. Now, when we looked at World War I, we looked at Alvin York. And Alvin York and some of the members of his family told his story. Probably one of the most interesting Medal of Honor winners to come out of World War II was Desmond Doss. Instead of me telling you about it, let's let CBS.
And now a page from our Sunday morning almanac.
Washington, the Congressional Medal of Honor for 15 top heroes.
October 12, 1945, 69 years ago today.
And congratulations from General...
The day of an awards ceremony like no other.
Then presentation of the medals by President Truman himself.
President Harry Truman personally handed out the medals to those heroes of World War II, each with an inspiring story to tell.
But highlight interest today is on Corporal Desmond Doss of Lynchburg, Virginia.
Corporal Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist and a conscientious objector. The first objector ever to win the Congressional Medal.
U.S. forces assaulted the island of Okinawa.
During the 2.5-month-long Battle of Okinawa earlier that year, Doss had been serving his country as an unarmed medic. And on just one day, the citation noted, Doss carried 75 wounded men to safety, one by one, all while braving enemy fire with no means of shooting back.
I thank God for letting me do my part in this war and saving the lives of my fellow men.
Desmond Doss suffered serious wounds of his own during that very long battle and devoted much of the rest of his life to his church. And during the Vietnam War, the Seventh-day Adventists trained their conscientious objectors to become medics at a camp in Michigan named for Desmond Doss. He died in 2006 at the age of 87, 61 years after giving the gift of life to so many.
And for his kind of courage, America's conscientious admiration.
Now, both Eugene Sledge and Desmond Doss have had movies made about them. They're a little intense, but they're pretty good movies. Well, in 1944, President Roosevelt was informed that the atomic bomb was well on the path and that a prototype would be tested the following year. But just based on the studies, the atomic bomb would kill hundreds of thousands and destroy hundreds of square miles. It would be a bomb so devastating that no enemy could survive. On August of 1945, President Truman authorized the dropping of the atomic bomb. Now, when the Enola Gay, the ship that carried the atomic bomb, took off for Japan, it had 5 different targets. And as it was getting closer to Japan, they began to check the weather. And the weather over Hiroshima, which is a seacoast city, was clear. And that's why Hiroshima was chosen. Hiroshima was chosen because the weather was clear and they felt that the pictures they could take would be of great quality. This is the actual explosion many miles away from the Enola Gay. And indeed, the devastation of Hiroshima was tremendous. The bomb killed tens of thousands immediately, and hundreds of thousands would die within the week of what we call radiation sickness. Now, when the atomic bomb goes off, bits and pieces of the uranium, too small to be seen by the naked eye, are going to go into the atmosphere. And whether you breathe it in or you touch it and then get it into your mouth or something like that, uranium is one of the most deadly poisons known to man. And the death from radiation is one of the cruelest deaths that you could ever have. 2 days later, on August the 10th, another plane dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. And again, Nagasaki was wiped off the face of the earth. It was obvious to the emperor that his country was going to have a rain of atomic bombs fall upon him. So he proposed to the military leaders that there be a call for peace.
On August the 6th, 1945, two American Super Fortress bombers arrived over the Japanese city of Hiroshima on the world's most devastating military mission. The Enola Gay, with Colonel Paul Tibbets at the controls, was about to drop the first atomic bomb, a weapon conceived by a group of international scientists based at Los Alamos in the United States. So far, no one knew exactly what effect the bomb would have, either on the unsuspecting inhabitants below or on the crew of the plane itself. They were soon to find out.
When the bomb went off, the whole inside of the airplane just lit up as if someone had set off a flashbulb. And then we had to wait. This was our big worry, is what would the blast do when the blast got to the airplane. And finally the blast did arrive. It was like being in an ash can and getting someone kicking. And then we crowded through the window and saw just the whole city completely covered in smoke with this very tall mushroom cloud rising from it.
President Truman had already threatened the Japanese with a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. When the truth was revealed, his words seemed an understatement. Buildings vaporized, so did the clothes on people's backs. Was it a bomb that should never have been dropped? Some people thought so. Others argued that it shortened the war and kept the subsequent peace. One thing was not in doubt. Hiroshima taught mankind the awful truth about nuclear weapons and just what horror they could display.
Now, Harry Truman was asked just about every time a reporter asked him questions after he left the presidency, if given the chance again, would he drop the atomic bombs? And he always said yes. And Truman said he felt that this saved lives, not only for American lives, but also Japanese lives. There are others who say, no, this was too terrible of a weapon. It should have never been used. On September of 1945, Japanese leaders signed an unconditional surrender aboard the battleship Missouri. Obviously, Truman being from Missouri, he had arranged that the Missouri would be the it would be the site of the signing. Here is how American people saw the signing.
Battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay was the setting for the signing of the surrender terms, which officially brought the war with Japan to an end. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allies, joined Admirals Nimitz and Halsey and other top commanders aboard the Missouri September 2nd, 1945. The ceremony took place on a Sunday. Foreign Minister Shigemitsu and other representatives of the Japanese nation on the deck of the battleship, even as the world recalled that other Sunday in 41, and the act of treachery which shattered the calm of the Pacific Ocean and the world. Now at last, defeated Japan and the Allies were to sign the surrender terms.
The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. As Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with.
First to sign the surrender document was Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu for Japan's emperor. Articles in the surrender terms included the following. All provisions of the Potsdam Declaration were accepted. All armed forces were surrendered unconditionally. Acknowledgement that authority of the emperor and the Japanese government was subject to the will of the Allied Supreme Commander General Douglas MacArthur, now signing. The first pen became a cherished memento for General Wainwright. The second pen went to Britain's General Percival. In order, the nation signed. General Su Yung Chang for China. For the United Kingdom, Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser. General MacArthur called on the representative of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant General Kuzuma N. Vierebianko. Also, the representative of Canada, Colonel L. Moore Cosgrove. In all, there were 12 signatures affixed to the surrender document, and then in 20 minutes it was over. Nearly 4 years of bitter conflict had come to this brief ceremony. The war chapter was closed, and a weary world looked hopefully to new horizons of enduring peace.
So, true or false? The war in the Pacific ended before the war in Europe. True or false? The war in the Pacific ended before the war in Europe. Ms. Buschos? False. The war in Europe ended in May of 45. The war in the Pacific ended in September of 45. Okay, if you have pre-printed slides, you need to draw another line. We've looked at Europe. We've looked at Pacific. Now let's look at the home front. So we begin again on December 7, 1941. Now, we knew that the Japanese had attacked us at Pearl Harbor. Well, what about all the Japanese Americans who lived in the United States? What should happen to them? Now, a person of Japanese descent was called Nisei, and I have spelt it on the last line, N-I-S-E-I. I believe it's one of the terms that is on your term sheet. If you are a Japanese immigrant or a Japanese American, then you are called a Nisei. There was a great deal of fear throughout the United States. Were these Nisei loyal to America? Congress and President Roosevelt decided that all Nisei were to be rounded up and they were to be sent to relocation camps, or what the Germans called concentration camps. Once the Nisei got in, they could not get out. There were armed guards. They got up at a particular time, they went to bed at a particular time. Now, we like to say that they were treated nicely, but they weren't free. The Nisei were not allowed to move around. All of their mail was censored. Anything they saw from the outside world was censored. Many Nisei wanted to be part of the U.S. Army. They wanted to prove their loyalty to the United States. And in 1943, the United States Army began to allow Nisei soldiers to enlist. Now, it was volunteer only. They were not drafted. If you were enlisted, you were taken by special train to training And then after you have been trained, you would be sent to Europe. No Nisei would ever be sent to the Pacific Theater. They would only be sent to Europe. And in Europe, they were one of the most decorated units during the war. Well, what did the Nisei think of all of this?
This is my grammar school years here.
Minoru Imamura was born in a farming community just south of Los Angeles in 1926. It's where his immigrant parents had settled after leaving Japan in search of a better life. And while Imamura, who likes to be called Min, grew up during the Great Depression, he led what sounds very much like an all-American life.
I had a dog, and I had a shotgun, and went rabbit hunting, and it was, I think it was the nicest time of life for me.
But the idyllic youth that Min remembers came to a very sudden end in his mid-teens. On December 7th, 1941, Minoru Imamura was a high school sophomore and a few weeks shy of turning 16. 2 months later, President Roosevelt issued an executive order calling for all Japanese Americans to be relocated to internment camps.
My dad worked so hard, he put his energy in his farming, and he decided to buy 50 acres. He lost everything.
A new book of photographs reveals some never-before-published images of the internment. It's called Un-American and published by Chicago's City File Press. Michael Williams is the book's co-writer, who says a photograph he saw years ago sparked the project.
It was of a Japanese-American shopkeeper in Oakland, California, and he was in the process of being incarcerated. And he put a banner on the front of his business that said, "I am an American." And it was that single image that always stuck in my head.
That photograph was taken by the noted photographer Dorothea Lange. Lange, along with other noted photographers, including Ansel Adams, were commissioned by the U.S. government to chronicle the internment of Japanese Americans, and those photos were carefully controlled by the government.
If newspapers wanted a picture, they would supply a picture. Generally, they would be pictures that showed positive aspects of life in the camps. They did not document the dust storms, the extreme cold, the uninsulated conditions in which people were living. They did not show the horse stalls that entire families were living in.
Michael Williams says he and his co-author sifted through thousands of photographs at the National Archives, uncovering some they say are being published for the first time and span the entire 4 years of the internment era, beginning in 1942 when families were notified and began selling off their possessions. They were transported by trucks and trains to assembly camps where they were processed. The Imamura family was later transferred to the internment camp in Granada, Colorado, one of 10 such facilities. It's where Min finished high school 2 years later, and in a supreme case of irony, he was then drafted into the Army.
There were 2 questionnaires: if you'll be loyal to the United States, and if you are drafted, you would just serve. And the 2 questions I've answered yes, yes.
But by the time he reached Europe, the war had ended. Back home, the last of the internment camps would not close until 1946.
For here, we admit a wrong.
In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed a law granting reparations to Japanese Americans who had been interned. Each survivor received $20,000. Among them were Min Imamura and his wife Mary, whom he met at the Granada internment camp. Gail Imamura Huffman is their daughter.
Whatever monetary amount was given was inadequate to compensate for a loss. I think my parents came out of that experience remarkably unbitter compared to some other people that unfortunately it was a very scarring experience for them.
And Min Imamura, who recently celebrated his 91st year as a proud Japanese American and U.S. Army veteran, says he's never lost pride for his homeland.
There is no country like the USA. Yes.
Now, as the daughter stated, he came out of this remarkably unfazed. If you ever get a chance, you need to Google George Takei, T-A-K-I-E. He was Ensign Sulu on Star Trek. He too was part of the internment camp. And he is somewhat bitter about what happened to him and his family. As we heard in the video, President Reagan is going to give out reparations, but the reparations did not even scratch the surface of the amount of money that was lost. To pay for the war effort, to allow America to get the number of men into the war effort, all men between the ages of 18 and 30 were drafted. Now, if you wanted, you could enlist as young as 16. Now, my mother is a 1943 graduate of St. Peter's High School. And when you look at the graduates of St. Peter's High School, almost all of them are women. There are very few men in the graduation picture. And my mother said that the junior year, when she was a junior in high school, that's when most of the boys quit and they went off to war. We have a picture on the second floor hallway of a retired American general, Air Force general. He was one of my mother's classmates who had quit early. Women were not only allowed to join the military, they were encouraged to join the military. And each branch of women had their own group. The Wades were women who had enlisted in the Navy. There were WACS, W-A-C-S, women who had enlisted in the Army. Now, in many cases, they did what would be called the mundane jobs. They did the secretarial work, they did the typing work, they did this, they did that, so that men were free to go to the front. Probably the most interesting of all of the servicers were the WASP, W-A-S-P.
On June 6, 1944, as Allied troops fought and died on the beaches of Normandy, high in the skies above the fray, thousands of U.S. warplanes lent vital support. And those planes were there, in part, thanks to the efforts of a little-known band of brave women far from the front lines. Women like Lucille Wise.
Well, I guess the last time I flew was in December 1944.
What was it like?
It was, well, it was hard to give up. I loved the flying.
At 93, Lucille is one of the few left to tell their story firsthand. Why did you want to fly U.S. warplanes?
Well, of course, one reason, of course, was because I loved to fly. But I also wanted to help in the war effort. Everybody was so patriotic.
In 1942, the U.S. built thousands of planes in its war factories each month. These planes needed to be delivered to air bases, but pilots were in short supply. And so in the summer of 1943, a call went out for women to do the flying.
I was accepted in May of '43, one of the earlier classes.